Harlem, 1952. It wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a living, breathing engine of culture, struggle, and power. And at the heart of it, in a tailored suit and a calm, watchful gaze, was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. To the people on the street, he was a folk hero. A modern-day Robin Hood who fed the hungry, paid rent for the struggling, and kept the predatory cops and loan sharks at bay. To the 5 Italian crime families downtown, he was an anomaly. A problem. A black man who controlled a multi-million-dollar empire and answered to no one but himself. That empire was built on the numbers game. A simple lottery that was the lifeblood of Harlem. Every dollar that flowed through it passed under Bumpy's scrutiny. He took his cut, sure, but he ensured the money also flowed back into the community. It was a delicate balance of fear, respect, and genuine care. A balance the mob had never understood and now refused to tolerate. Which is why, on a cold, rain-threatened night in November 1952, 5 men made a decision. A fatal one. They decided to solve the Harlem problem, not with a war on the streets, but with a message in the dirt. They wouldn't just kill Bumpy Johnson. They would erase him. They would bury him alive. These weren't high-ranking bosses. They were soldiers from a crew in the Bronx, known for their brutality and their discretion. Their boss, a man named Vincent the Shovel Carducci, had gotten the contract from someone high up in the Genovese family. The order was simple: make Bumpy disappear. Not a bullet in an alley. A disappearance. The kind that breeds legends of cowardice, of a king who ran. The kind that breaks a people's spirit. They'd taken him coming out of a late-night meeting in the Bronx. A rare moment of vulnerability, of being on someone else's turf. A clean grab. No witnesses. Now, standing at the edge of that pit, smelling the damp earth, Bumpy Johnson faced an ending worse than death. Oblivion. Silence. To be forgotten, packed down in the cold mud while the world he built moved on without him. The leader, a thick-necked man named Greco, smirked. He expected pleading, bargaining, tears. That's what usually happened at the edge of a hole. This was different. Bumpy's silence was heavy, solid. It filled the space more than the muttered curses of the gravediggers. Nothing to say, Your Majesty? No last words for your loyal subjects. Then Bumpy Johnson spoke. Not to Greco. To the man holding the shovel next to him, a younger guy, his knuckles white on the wooden handle. Your father's name is Antonio, right? He works at the produce market on 141st. Got that bad cough. You bring him that honey and lemon every Sunday. The smile on Greco's face died. In that instant, in a muddy field miles from his kingdom, Bumpy Johnson did the impossible. He turned his own grave into a weapon. And the 5 men who thought they were burying a nightmare were about to wake up inside of it. The young man with the shovel, Joey, stared. The flashlight in Greco's hand trembled, just slightly, casting jumping shadows across the pit. The other 3 men exchanged glances. This wasn't in the script. The script was, dump the body, fill the hole, go get a drink. Fear was supposed to be a one-way street. Greco recovered first, puffing out his chest. So you know a name. Big deal. You know what else I know? In 2 minutes, you're 6 feet under and nobody's ever finding you. They'll think you skipped town. Ran off with some broad. Your kingdom? He spat into the hole. It'll be hours before the dirt settles on your face. Bumpy's eyes never left Joey's. He ignored Greco as if he were a barking dog. His voice was low, conversational, almost kind. You bring him the honey on Sundays because the doctor said it'll help. But it's not the cough, Joey. It's the dust in that warehouse. It's in his lungs. And the man who owns that warehouse? He's a friend of Vincent Carducci. Your boss. Joey's breath hitched. How do you know my name? A slow, weary smile from Bumpy. It's my business to know. Just like it's my business to know that your sister Maria, she wants to be a teacher. She's at Hunter College. Good for her. A smart girl. He paused, letting the words sink into the cold air. It would be a shame if something happened to that warehouse job. Or if a scholarship somehow disappeared. The silence that followed was thicker than the mud at their feet. It wasn't just the threat. It was the intimacy of it. Greco had a file on Bumpy, where he ate, who he met, what he owned. But Bumpy? He knew the honey in their tea. He knew their dreams. Greco stepped forward, jabbing a finger at Bumpy's chest. Enough. You're talking to spook the kid. It doesn't change anything. You're still going in that hole. Bumpy finally turned his gaze to Greco. The false warmth vanished, replaced by a glacial calm. Greco. Salvatore Greco. Your wife, Cecilia, she thinks you're on a trucking job in Jersey. You told her you'd be back by Friday with a bonus. The bonus for this. He nodded toward the grave. But Cecilia, she's a worrier. She called your cousin Polly last night crying. Said she had a bad dream. Dreamt you were drowning in dirt. Greco's face went pale. You stay away from my wife. I've never been near her, Bumpy said softly. But you brought me here. You made your business my business. And my business is connections. The man who owns the cab company your wife uses to go to her sister's? He pays a tribute to me. The grocer who delivers her groceries on Thursdays? His nephew runs numbers for one of my lieutenants. Bumpy leaned forward as far as his bonds would allow. You see, Greco? You don't live in a world separate from mine. You live in the world I see. And right now, I see you in a hole. One of the other men, a hulking figure named Rocco, growled. Boss, let's just do it and go. He's playing chess on a checkboard. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter? Bumpy's voice cut through the night, sharp now. You Rocco. The bruiser. You like to think with your fists. How's your boy little Michael? The one in the Catholic school up in Yonkers? The tuition's a killer, isn't it? Especially since your gambling debts to that bookie on Amsterdam. What's his name? Leo? Leo who works for me. Rocco froze. The shovel in Joey's hands was now shaking visibly. Bumpy swept his eyes across all 5 of them. You were hired to bury a man. But you're not just burying me. You're burying your father's health, Joey. You're burying your wife's peace, Greco. You're burying your son's future, Rocco. He let that hang, a death sentence more concrete than the pit. Vincent, the shovel, Carducci gave you an order. He didn't give you a future. I'm offering you one. Greco was sweating now despite the chill. You're tied up in a grave. You offer nothing. I offer forgetfulness, Bumpy said. His voice dropped back to that hypnotic, reasonable tone. You drive away. You tell Carducci it's done. You collect your money. And I forget I ever saw your faces. I forget your families. Your lives go on exactly as they were. No curses, no bad luck, no mysterious fires or lost jobs or vanished scholarships. Just peace. He nodded toward the city lights. Or you put me in that hole. And by the time you get back to your car, the first phone call will have been made. To Leo the bookie. To the warehouse owner. To the cab dispatcher. My people won't come after you with guns. Not at first. They'll dismantle your lives brick by brick until there's nothing left for you to come home to. And then when you have nothing left to lose, then they'll find you. The calculation in the air was almost audible. It was no longer 5 armed men against 1 bound prisoner. It was 5 men staring into the intricate, invisible web of power Bumpy Johnson had spent decades weaving. He wasn't just a gangster. He was the central knot in a net that held all of Harlem, and its thread stretched far beyond 125th Street, into their kitchens, their children's schools, their parents' sickbeds. Joey was the first to break. He threw the shovel down. It landed with a thud on the pile of loose dirt. I'm out. I'm not doing this. Greco whirled on him. You coward. He's bluffing. Is he? Joey yelled, his voice cracking. How does he know about my pop's cough? How does he know about Sunday? He looked at Bumpy, terror and a strange awe in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson. I didn't know. I just needed the money. Bumpy gave a single, slow nod. Go wait in the car, Joey. And Joey, a soldier of the Bronx mob, obeyed the king of Harlem. He turned and walked away from the grave. The balance of power had just crumbled. The other 3 men shifted on their feet, looking from Greco's furious face to Bumpy's impassive one. The grave wasn't a threat anymore. It was a testament to their own stupidity. They had dug a pit for their own futures. Greco saw it slipping away. He made a desperate, violent lunge, not at Bumpy, but for the pistol tucked in Rocco's waistband. Fine. I'll do it myself. But Rocco's hand clamped over Greco's wrist. The big man's face was a mask of conflicted rage. He looked at Bumpy. My boy, you swear on your life? You leave him out of it. Bumpy met his gaze. On my life. You drive away tonight and Michael never hears my name. Rocco released Greco's wrist with a shove. It's over, Sal. The man's got ghosts we can't even see. I'm not dying for Carducci's pride. He looked at the other 2 who mutely nodded. The contract was broken. Greco stood alone, panting with impotent fury, surrounded by his own men who had become his judge and jury. He was a man who had built his reputation on fear, and he had just been masterclassed in its true application. Bumpy Johnson had weaponized their own lives against them. Bumpy finally moved his bound hands. Now, someone cut me loose. It was Rocco who pulled out a switchblade and stepped forward. He didn't look Bumpy in the eye as he sawed through the ropes. The fibers fell into the mud. Bumpy brought his hands in front of him, rubbing the raw marks on his wrists. He didn't thank Rocco. He simply turned and started walking, not toward their car, but toward the distant chain-link fence that bordered the site. Over his shoulder, he spoke one last time, his voice floating back on the cold wind. "Tell Carducci I'm dead. Sell it, your lives depend on it. And remember, you are ghosts to me now. Stay that way." The 5 men, 4 traitors and 1 broken leader, watched the shadow of Bumpy Johnson dissolve into the greater darkness. They were left standing in the halo of the headlights, the empty grave gaping beside them like a silent scream. They had tried to bury the nightmare. But as they drove back to the Bronx in a silence heavier than any corpse, each one knew the truth. They had just unleashed it, and it knew where they lived. The drive back to the Bronx was a funeral procession for their own courage. No one spoke. The only sounds were the engine's growl and the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers against the light, mocking rain that had begun to fall. Joey stared out the passenger window, seeing nothing but his father's face. Rocco gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, every bump in the road feeling like a tremor of the doom to come. The other 2 men, Vinny and Al, sat in the back, one chain smoking, the other just staring at the back of Greco's head. Greco sat in the passenger seat, a statue of seething humiliation. His mind raced, not with strategy but with a scalding, childish fury. He'd been undone not by a gun but by a few quiet words. He'd been stripped of his authority in front of his crew by a man who should have been dirt. The weight of the failure and the terrifying, intimate knowledge Bumpy possessed was a cage closing around him. "We tell Carducci it's done," Greco finally said, his voice gravelly. "We stick to the story. We buried him. We saw him go under. We get paid. Then we keep our mouths shut forever." Rocco's eyes flicked toward him. "And you think Johnson just lets that be? He's not in the ground, Sal. He's out there. And he knows everything. He said he'd forget us if we played along." Greco snapped, the desperation leaking through. "He said we had to be ghosts," Joey whispered from the back. "Not him. He's alive. We're the dead men walking." The truth of it settled in the car, colder than the November air. They had become liars in a game where lies were punishable by death, from both sides. They pulled up to a nondescript social club in the Belmont section, a place where Carducci conducted his darker business. The glow from the basement windows looked like the fires of hell. Meanwhile, miles away, Bumpy Johnson walked. He didn't head for a main road or flag down a car. He moved through the skeletal construction site, through a break in a fence, and into the maze of backstreets and rail yards that threaded the city's edges. The bindings were gone from his wrists, but the chill of the grave was in his bones. It wasn't fear. It was a crystallized, pure fury. They hadn't just tried to kill him. They had tried to make him nothing. An unmarked mystery. To dishonor him completely. He found an all-night diner on the fringes of Washington Heights. The counterman, an old Greek with tired eyes, took one look at the well-dressed but mud-caked black man and hesitated. Then Bumpy looked up, and something in that gaze, an ancient, weary authority, made the man simply nod. Bumpy used the payphone in the back. He dialed a number from memory. It rang once before being picked up. "No hello. It's Bumpy." His voice was calm. "I need a quiet car. Now, corner of 178th and Broadway. And send word to my wife. Tell her I'm delayed but I'm whole." 20 minutes later, a pristine black 1951 Cadillac Coupe de Ville pulled up, driven by a man who said nothing. Bumpy got in the back. The warmth of the interior was a shock. As they glided silently toward Harlem, Bumpy looked at his hands. There was dirt under his nails. Grave dirt. He closed his hands into fists. Back at the social club, the 5 men stood before Vincent, the shovel Carducci. Carducci was a bull of a man, gone soft in the middle, with thick, hairy forearms and eyes that were perpetually squinted, as if evaluating the depth of a hole. He listened to Greco's report, his face impassive. "And we filled it in. Tamped it down good. Won't be nothing but a patch of wet dirt by morning." Greco finished, his voice straining for conviction. Carducci took a long sip of anisette. He placed the glass down carefully on his desk, which was clear except for a telephone and a brass knuckle duster used as a paperweight. He looked at each of the 5 men in turn, his gaze lingering on Joey's twitching eye, on Rocco's refusal to meet his stare. "You tamped it down good," Carducci repeated, his voice a low rumble. "Yes, boss." "And he said nothing?" "Bumpy Johnson. The king of Harlem. He just let you put him in the ground without a peep." Greco's throat was dry. He was scared. "Cursed a bit." "Nothing important." Carducci nodded slowly. He stood up, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of Greco. For a long moment he just looked at him, smelling the lie and the sweat, seeing the ghost of terror in his eyes. Then, fast for a big man, Carducci's hand shot out. He didn't hit Greco. He grabbed his overcoat lapel and rubbed the fabric between his fingers, then brought his fingers to his nose. He sniffed. He smelled the damp wool, the cigarette smoke, and the distinct, clean, mineral scent of freshly turned earth. His eyes shifted to their shoes. All 5 pairs were caked in the same distinctive, clay-heavy mud from the construction site. Carducci released Greco's coat with a slight shove of disgust. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and lit a cigar. He took 2 long puffs, the smoke clouding the lamplight. "You stink of dirt," he said quietly. "But not grave dirt. Not dirt you've been standing on top of, packing down." He leaned forward, the cigar pointing at them like an accusing finger. "You stink of dirt from the side of the hole. Dirt you stood in. Dirt you knelt in." His voice dropped to a whisper. "The dirt you were in when you cut him loose." The room went absolutely still. The furnace kicked on in the basement, a hollow roar. "Boss, I swear," Greco began. "Shut up," Carducci roared, slamming his fist on the desk. The knuckle duster jumped. "You incompetent stunats. You had him. You had him in the ground. And you let him talk his way out? What did he offer you? Money?" Rocco found his voice, a deep, resigned tone. "He offered us our lives, Vinny. Not him killing us. You killing us when you found out we failed. And he knew things. About our families. My kid's school. Joey's old man." Carducci's rage seemed to freeze, then reform into something colder, more calculating. "What do you mean he knew things?" "He knew everything," Joey blurted, tears of frustration in his eyes. "He knew I bring my pop honey on Sundays. He knew your wife's name, Greco. He's a witch." A terrifying understanding dawned on Carducci's face. The failure wasn't just cowardice. It was strategic defeat. Bumpy hadn't fought them with strength. He'd bypassed them entirely, targeting the foundations of their lives, foundations Carducci himself had never bothered to learn. He didn't see soldiers, he saw tools. Bumpy saw the men holding the tools. Carducci sat back, the fight gone out of him, replaced by a dreading chill. He had sent 5 men to bury a problem. Instead, they had unleashed a prophet of vengeance who could see into the private hells of his own crew. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just alive. He was more powerful now because he had a grievance. A personal, profound grievance against Carducci. "Get out," Carducci said, his voice empty. "All of you. Get out of my sight." The men shuffled out, their relief at leaving the room immediately swallowed by the greater terror waiting for them in the outside world. They were marked men by both the king they betrayed and the boss they failed. Alone, Carducci stared at the phone. He had to call upstairs. To the Genovese captain who had given the order. He had to tell him that Bumpy Johnson was not only alive but had psychologically dismantled his hit squad. He picked up the receiver, his hand trembling slightly. It wasn't the fear of punishment. It was the fear of the unknown. He had tried to bury a legend. And legends, once dug up, haunt forever. The phone in Frank, the ghost Genovese's study, rang just past 3 in the morning. Genovese, a man who prized order and discretion above all else, did not receive such calls lightly. He listened in silence as Carducci's voice, stripped of its usual bluster, crackled through the line, outlining the disaster in halting sentences. When Carducci finished, there was a long silence on the line, so complete that Carducci wondered if they'd been disconnected. Then came Genovese's voice, quiet as a serpent moving through dry grass. "Let me understand. You had the nigger king in a hole. And now he's shopping for a new suit?" He got inside their heads, Frank. He knew things. He's a Harlem punk. Genovese's roar was sudden, volcanic, causing Carducci to flinch. He knows what he pays people to tell him. And you sent 5 head cases who care more about their daddy's cough than their honor. Another pause, the sound of controlled breathing. "This is no longer a Harlem problem. This is a you problem. You have until sunrise to become a ghost yourself. Leave town. Go to Florida. Disappear. Because if Bumpy Johnson doesn't find you by noon, I will. And I won't use a shovel. I'll use a meat hook." The line went dead. Carducci sat holding the receiver, the dial tone a mocking buzz. Flight wasn't an option. Running was an admission that would only delay the end. He was caught in a vice. Genovese's cold-blooded fury on one side, and Bumpy Johnson's intimate, personal vengeance on the other. He made a decision born of desperation. If he was going down, he'd take the Harlem nightmare with him. He started making calls, mobilizing every tough shooter and arsonist in his crew who hadn't been part of the graveyard fiasco. The order was simple, brutal, and suicidal: burn it all. Hit every numbers bank, every policy hole, every bar that pays tribute to Johnson. Tonight. Now, we go to war. Back in Harlem, Bumpy arrived at his real office, a back booth in a 24-hour rib joint called the High Note. The owner, a massive, quiet man named Big Willie, brought him a double bourbon, a clean towel, and a fresh shirt without being asked. Bumpy washed the grave dirt from his hands in the small sink in the back. The mud swirled down the drain, but the cold feeling remained. He changed, the crisp white cotton feeling like armor. He sat in the booth, the bourbon untouched in front of him. His lieutenant, a sharp-dressed, calm man named Junie Bird, slid in across from him. Junie had already gotten the whispers from the street. The Bronx crew that grabbed you, they're back in their neighborhood. They look like they've seen a ghost. Carducci's place is lighting up like a Christmas tree. Phones ringing, cars coming and going. Bumpy nodded slowly. Carducci's scared. A scared animal is a dangerous animal. He'll lash out. He'll try to hurt what's mine to prove he still has teeth. He finally took a sip of the bourbon, letting the fire of it burn away the last of the grave's chill. We don't wait for him to lash out. We remove the teeth. He began giving orders, his voice low and methodical. These were not orders of blind retaliation. They were surgical, strategic, and rooted in the same intimate knowledge he had used in the field. Send word to Leo the bookie. Rocco's debt is forgiven. Effective immediately. Then have Leo call Rocco and tell him. Junie's eyebrow raised. Forgiven? After what he did? A man who thinks he's in your debt is off balance, Bumpy said. A man whose debt is forgiven is in your pocket forever. He'll wait for the other shoe to drop. He'll jump at shadows. He's neutralized. He continued. The warehouse on 141st where Joey's father works. Buy it. Through a holding company. Then have the new owner implement a new safety policy. Full masks, better ventilation. And give Antonio Greco a promotion to foreman, with a health insurance stipend. Junie was writing it down, a faint smile on his lips. He was seeing the genius, the brutal chess move. So when Joey hears, he'll know the hand that feeds his father is now my hand, Bumpy finished. He will never lift a finger against me again. He'll be my unknowing sentry in the Bronx. And Greco? Carducci? Bumpy's eyes hardened. Greco lives in fear of his wife finding out. So we send Cecilia Greco a bouquet of flowers tomorrow. No card. Just flowers. Let him explain that to her. The psychological torture was exquisite. As for Carducci, he's declaring war. So we accept. But we fight it on my map, not his. Before Junie could leave to execute the orders, a runner burst into the High Note, breathless. Mr. Johnson. They hidden the spots. Over on Lenox. The drop on 129th. Cars, men with bats and torches. Carducci's war had begun. Junie looked to Bumpy, expecting a command to mobilize their soldiers, to hit the streets for a bloody block-by-block battle. Bumpy didn't stand up. He took another slow sip of his bourbon. Let them burn. Boss? The spots they're hitting were underinsured. The money wasn't there. It was moved 2 hours ago. He allowed himself a small, cold smile. Carducci is burning empty houses. He's showing his hand, exhausting his men and making noise. We, he said leaning forward, will be quiet. He gave his final orders. They were not about defending territory. They were about severing connections. A call was made to a deputy police commissioner whose gambling habits Bumpy discreetly funded. Within an hour, every patrol car in the Bronx found a reason to circle Carducci's social club, his known bars, his lieutenants' homes. The pressure was instant and official. A second call was made to a team of specialized freelancers downtown. Their task wasn't violence but theft. As Carducci's men were away torching storefronts in Harlem, these men, experts in silence, emptied Carducci's 3 biggest safe houses, the cash reserves meant to fund a long-term conflict. The final move was the most elegant. Bumpy had a messenger, a young, fast kid on a bicycle, pedal to a neutral bar in Jersey where union bosses met. The message was for the head of the truckers' union, a man who owed Bumpy for a past favor. The message was one sentence. The contract for hauling Carducci's beverage distribution is now a liability. By 5 a.m., as the first false dawn lightened the sky, Vincent, the shovel Carducci, stood amid the chaotic, violent energy he had unleashed. His men were returning, smelling of smoke and adrenaline, boasting of the damage they'd done. But no calls of ransom were coming in. No desperate offers for peace from Harlem. The phone in his office was ringing, but with bad news. Cops everywhere, safes cleaned out, and the biggest blow. His legitimate front, the distribution company, was just informed the Teamsters were pulling all drivers, effective immediately. His legal income was frozen solid. He had thrown a wild, expensive punch. And he had hit nothing but air. The nightmare wasn't coming at him with guns and razors. It was dismantling the world from under his feet, brick by financial brick, and leaving him standing alone on a crumbling cliff. The true depth of his miscalculation dawned on him. You cannot bury a man who is not just a body but the very soil itself. The sun rose over a Harlem that smelled of smoke and whispers. The damage was visible: shattered windows on 2 policy banks, a social club with its interior scorched, the smoldering skeleton of a candy store that served as a numbers drop. But the mood on the street wasn't fear or despair. It was a low, simmering anger directed outward. People swept glass, not with defeat, but with a grim determination. They had seen Bumpy's handiwork before. This was a prelude, not an ending. At the high note, Bumpy received reports as he ate a plate of eggs and grits. Junie laid it out. Carducci's bleeding. Cops pulled over 3 of his trucks for safety inspections, found hijacked cigarettes. His cash is gone. His men are looking over their shoulders, not at us but at their own bosses. The word is Genovese has disowned him. Bumpy nodded, chewing slowly. He's a dead man. He just doesn't know which reaper is coming for him. He pushed his plate away. But this isn't about Carducci anymore. He's a symptom. The disease is the idea that Harlem can be taken. We need to treat the disease. He stood up. Give me a meeting. Not with soldiers. With the board of directors. Junie understood. The commission? Referring to the loose governing body of the 5 families. No, not the whole circus. Just the 2 who matter. Genovese because he gave the order. And Costello because he's a businessman who hates bad investments. Frank Costello, the prime minister of the underworld, was known for his political connections and his preference for profit over pointless violence. Arranging such a summit was a delicate, dangerous task. It required intermediaries, coded messages, and absolute guarantees of safety. The message Bumpy sent was simple. You tried to bury the problem. Now it's above ground and in your boardroom. Let's discuss the cost. The meeting was set for that evening at a neutral location, a private dining room at the Waldorf Astoria, a temple of old money elegance far removed from the mud of construction sites or the smoke of Harlem storefronts. Meanwhile, the 5 gravediggers were unraveling. Joey had gone home to find his father for the first time in weeks, not coughing, talking excitedly about new fans installed at work and a surprise promotion. The relief Joey felt was immediately poisoned by the understanding of how this had happened. Bumpy Johnson was not just a threat. He was a providence, and Joey was now eternally in his debt, a thought more terrifying than any threat. Rocco got the call from Leo the bookie. Debt's cleared, pal. Merry Christmas. When Rocco, confused, asked why, Leo simply said, a benefactor. You got a powerful friend. The line went dead. Rocco sat in his kitchen, staring at the wallpaper. He was free, but the freedom felt like a collar. He was owned by a mercy he hadn't asked for. Greco, holed up in a mistress's apartment, received a photo delivered by a blind cab driver. It was a picture of his own house, his wife Cecilia visible in the window, arranging a large, beautiful bouquet of lilies. No note. He called home trying to sound casual. Hey Seal, where'd the flowers come from? I don't know, Sal. They're beautiful. No card. Maybe from you, you big lug? Trying to make up for being away? Her delighted laughter was torture. He spent the day paralyzed, waiting for a follow-up call that never came, the silence more agonizing than any accusation. Vincent Carducci, in his now deserted social club, finally saw the full scope of the tomb he'd built for himself. His remaining loyalists were few. A call from a captain in the Genovese family confirmed his exile. You're persona non grata, Vinny. You're bad business. Don't come to any family socials. He was cut off. He looked at the knuckle duster on his desk, a tool for close personal violence. It was useless against the systemic, silent collapse he was experiencing. In a final, frantic act, he decided to go to the Waldorf, to crash the summit, to plead his case to Genovese and Costello in person, to throw himself on the mercy of the court, hoping his years of service outweighed his catastrophic failure. At 8 p.m., Bumpy Johnson walked into the Waldorf Astoria. He wore a midnight blue tailored suit, a crisp white pocket square, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. No visible weapon. He was escorted not by bodyguards, but by a single elderly, impeccably dressed maitre d' who knew the way. The room was opulent. Wood-paneled walls, a crystal chandelier, a table set for three. Frank Costello was already there, sipping mineral water. He was a man of calculated calm, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He gave Bumpy a nod, not friendly but professional. Vito Genovese stood by the window, his back to the room, radiating a stormy contempt. He did not turn when Bumpy entered. "Gentlemen," Bumpy said, taking his seat. Genovese whirled around. "We are not gentlemen with you. You are a gavone who got lucky. You're here because Frank insisted on cleaning up a mess." Costello sighed. "Vito, sit. We're here to have a conversation, not a circus." He looked at Bumpy. "You've made your point, Johnson. Carducci is finished. You inconvenienced some operations. What do you want?" Bumpy folded his hands on the table. "I want what I've always had. Respect for my borders. Harlem is mine. The numbers game is mine. You try to take it, you pay a price. Last night Vincent Carducci paid. He's bankrupt, isolated, and waiting to die. The 5 men who worked for him are broken, loyal to me now out of fear of what I know. This was the cost of one attempt." He looked directly at Genovese. "The question for you is, are you willing to pay the cost for a second? Because the price goes up. It won't be a Bronx crew that falls apart. It'll be a shipping racket in Hoboken. A gambling wire in Miami. A union local you think I've never heard of." Genovese slammed his hand on the table. "You dare threaten us?" "It's not a threat," Bumpy said, his voice icy cool. "It's an economic forecast. I don't want a war. Wars are bad for business. But if you bring war to my door, I will not fight your soldiers. I will attack your profits. I will turn your own people into doubts. I will make every man who works for you wonder if I know his child's name. I will be a tax on your entire operation. A permanent, exhausting, costly tax." Costello steepled his fingers. He was a businessman. Bumpy was speaking his language. Risk assessment, cost-benefit analysis. "Harlem is a valuable territory," Costello conceded. "But this instability is also costly." "The instability was created by you," Bumpy replied. "I offer stability. A guaranteed, steady stream of tribute from the numbers, delivered peacefully. Or you can have chaos, attrition, and a never-ending, expensive feud. Your choice." It was at this moment that the door burst open. Vincent Carducci, disheveled, eyes wild with panic, stood there. He had gotten past the outer door, but his entrance was a breach of every protocol. "Boss, Frank, don't listen to him. He's a con artist. Let me finish what I started. Give me another crew, I'll put him in the ground where he belongs." The room froze. Carducci's plea was the worst possible move, a display of exactly the rash, uncontrollable violence that Costello despised and that Bumpy had just masterfully contrasted himself against. Genovese looked at his former soldier with pure disgust. "You are not here. You are nothing." Bumpy didn't even look at Carducci. He kept his eyes on the 2 bosses. "You see? This is the tool you chose. Unreliable. Emotional. Loud." He finally turned his gaze to Carducci. The look was not of hatred but of profound, dismissive pity. "Vincent, the shovel. You should have left town." Carducci, seeing his last chance evaporate, snapped. With a roar, he reached under his coat. But before he could clear his weapon, the elderly maitre d', who had been standing motionless by the door, moved with shocking speed. There was no gun. A single sharp crack of a small blackjack against Carducci's wrist, followed by a fluid twist that sent Carducci crashing to the floor, disarmed and moaning. The maitre d' straightened his jacket and resumed his post, his face impassive. Bumpy hadn't flinched. He turned back to Costello and Genovese as if the interruption were a fly being swatted. "My proposal stands. A clear border. Mutual respect. Profitable peace." Costello looked from the broken man on the floor to the impeccably calm king at the table. The calculation was complete. The nightmare wasn't the violence. It was the impeccable, untouchable control. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod to Genovese. Genovese, his jaw clenched, finally sat down. He didn't agree. He surrendered to the logic of the balance sheet. "Harlem is yours, Johnson. But this meeting never happened. And he gestured to Carducci on the floor, is yours to clean up." Bumpy stood. "A pleasure doing business." He walked to the door, stepping over Vincent Carducci without a downward glance. The maitre d' opened the door for him. As Bumpy exited into the plush hallway, he heard Genovese's low growl to the prone figure on the floor. "You see what you cost me? You see?" The sound of a kick, then a groan. Bumpy kept walking. The war was over. It had ended not in the streets, but in a palace. And the nightmare had been made official policy. The body of Vincent the Shovel Carducci was found 2 days later in the trunk of his own car, parked in a lot overlooking the very construction site where he had intended to bury Bumpy Johnson. The cause of death was a single, precise cut. The papers called it a professional hit, a mob falling out. No witnesses. No suspects. In the underworld, the message was received with chilling clarity. Bumpy Johnson had not only survived a hit ordered by the commission, he had been granted the right to execute the hitter. It was an unprecedented level of respect, forged in terror and cold calculus. For the 5 gravediggers, their sentences were not death, but transformation. They became living monuments to Bumpy's power, each a ghost in the machine he now indirectly controlled. Salvatore Greco's marriage, already strained by his lies, never recovered from the mystery of the flowers. His wife's suspicion became a constant, silent accusation. He grew paranoid, jumping at shadows, convinced every wrong number was Bumpy's man calling to finish the job. He drank himself out of the mob and into obscurity, dying a decade later from a failed liver, a man who spent his last years whispering to bartenders about the night he met the king. Joey, consumed by a debt of gratitude he could never repay, became fiercely, secretly loyal. He never rose in the ranks, choosing instead to be a font of harmless, useful information. 4 years, vague but timely tips would filter from the Bronx to Harlem, warning of opportunistic small-timers thinking of moving into numbers, or of loose talk in certain social clubs. Bumpy never acknowledged the source and Joey never asked for credit. He was repaying a kindness that had also been a life sentence. Rocco, the bruiser, found his violence gone out of him. The forgiveness of his debt had disarmed his rage. He left the life entirely, using his intimidating frame to get a job as a union enforcer, then a legitimate foreman. He became a devoted, almost overly protective father, channeling all his ferocity into keeping his son's world safe. He never spoke of that night, but sometimes when reading his boy a bedtime story, his hands would still tremble. The other 2, Vinny and Al, simply vanished. They changed their names, moved to different cities, and spent the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, waiting for a reckoning that never came. The uncertainty was the punishment. In Harlem, Bumpy's legend was cemented not as a tale of a narrow escape, but of unimaginable power. The story that spread was not of him kneeling in a grave, but of him walking out of the Waldorf Astoria with the blessing of the most powerful men in organized crime. His control over the neighborhood became absolute, but it was now tempered with a new, profound caution. He had seen how close oblivion was. He doubled his charitable works, not just as a facade, but as a deeper investment in the soil of his kingdom. The people were not just his subjects. They were his roots, his early warning system, his immortality. He never spoke of the incident to anyone, not even to his wife. But she noticed a change. He would sometimes stand at their apartment window late at night, staring out at the dark streets, his hand unconsciously rubbing his wrist where the ropes had been. He became more deliberate, more insulated, a fortress that had been tested and now knew its own weaknesses. One afternoon, a week after the Waldorf meeting, Junie Bird sat with him in the back of the High Note. "It's done," Junie said. "The lines are redrawn. They won't test us again. Not for a long time." Bumpy stirred his coffee. "They will. Maybe not in my time. But they will. They always do. They can't understand that this," he gestured vaguely, encompassing the room, the street outside, "isn't a piece of territory. It's a people. You can't own a people. You can only serve them long enough that they choose to protect you." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out his straight razor. He laid it on the checkered tablecloth between them. It gleamed dully under the neon light. "This didn't save me that night. My name did. The things I knew did. The people I helped did." He closed his eyes for a moment. "They tried to bury me alive, Junie. To make me nothing. To make me silent dirt." He opened his eyes, and there was a fire in them Junie had never seen before. Not anger, but a cold, everlasting resolve. "So I will never be silent. And I will never be just one man again. I will be every favor ever granted, every bill ever paid, every child ever fed. I will be the whisper in their ear and the shadow they can't see. That is my answer. That is my vengeance." He picked up the razor and slipped it back into his pocket. A tool, now a symbol. A weapon that had won a war without ever being opened. The following Sunday, Bumpy Johnson walked the streets of Harlem. Not in a car, but on foot. He stopped and talked. He bought a paper from a young boy, handing him a $5 bill and waving away the change. He complimented an old woman on her hat. He listened to a store owner complain about a leaky roof and sent a repairman the next day. He was seen. He was present. He was alive. And high above in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, Frank Costello looked over a report of quarterly earnings. He turned to an aide. The Harlem numbers? Steady. The tribute arrived on time. Counted clean. Costello nodded, looking out at the city skyline. A strange business, he mused almost to himself. We sent 5 men to bury a man, and instead they made him a god. Remember this, you can kill a man, but you cannot kill what he means to people. That is a power we will never have. He closed the ledger. The account was settled. They tried to bury the nightmare. They took the godfather of Harlem, bound him, drove him to the edge of the city, and threw him into a hole of his own. They believed they were burying a man. But a man is flesh and bone and fear. Bumpy Johnson was past fear. He was a network. A living system of loyalties and debts, of whispered secrets and remembered kindnesses. When they threw dirt on him, they weren't covering a body. They were planting a seed, and from that dark, silent place something terrifying grew. Not a monster of violence, but a specter of consequence that he fought back not with the weapons they understood, but with the weapons they ignored. The name of a sick father, the dream of a sister, the fear in a wife's heart that he won a war without firing a shot, by demonstrating a simple, unbearable truth. He knew them better than they knew themselves. The 5 men who held the shovels, they didn't die that night. They were sentenced to live, forever remembering the moment they had the king of Harlem in the dirt, and he still made them feel like peasants. Power isn't about who can bury whom. It's about who can climb out of the grave, brush off the dirt, and walk back into his city as if he never left. It's about making your enemies dig their own holes, then handing them the shovel with a smile. They tried to bury Bumpy Johnson alive. All they did was prove he was already immortal.